I used to think the worst career mistake was picking the wrong job. I don't anymore.
The mistake nobody warned me about is quieter, letting other people's idea of serious become the compass for your life. I remember the morning it clicked, a Tuesday in late October. Dark outside, kitchen light buzzing, coffee that tasted like metal because I'd left it too long on the warmer. I had a tie draped over the chair like it was waiting to be blamed. On the table was a promotion packet, thick, glossy, reassuring. I should have felt proud. Instead, I stared at my calendar and noticed something embarrassing. I had scheduled Call Mom for 3 weeks in a row and never done it. I had Jim written in ink like a promise and treated it like a suggestion. But the meeting with the regional director, that one was sacred. I drove into the city before sunrise. Buildings were still asleep, windows black, the streets clean in that rare way they only are before people arrive with their noise. And I kept thinking about one sentence I'd heard 100 times. Be practical. Practical is a useful word. It can also be a trap door. Because once you let practical decide for you, it doesn't stop at your job. It starts making decisions about your friendships, your health, your marriage, your weekends, your voice. It teaches you to postpone everything real until you've earned permission. That encouragement never comes. By the time I parked, my hands were tight on the steering wheel, not from stress exactly, more like resignation, like I was strapping myself into a life that looked good from the outside and felt smaller from the inside. That's the career mistake. Not the title, not the company, the slow trade, your agency for approval, your days for a story you didn't write. And it usually begins with one innocent sentence. This is what grown-ups do. Inside that promotion packet was a new salary and a new set of expectations. More travel, more quick calls that were never quick, more dinners eaten out of a cardboard container while I stared at a screen. I told myself, this is temporary. That was the lie that made everything easier to accept. Temporary stretches, if you let them, become a decade. They become the way your kids remember you, present but distracted. They become the way you remember yourself, capable but tired. When I finally walked into that building, the lobby smelled like polished stone and quiet money. The receptionist smiled like she had done it 1,000 times. I smiled back and felt, for a second, like I was playing a part someone else had written. That's why I start here. Because the mistake isn't dramatic, it's polite. It's the kind of mistake you can make while everyone is congratulating you. In my 20s, I could outwork anyone. That was my whole identity. If you asked me what I wanted, I would have said security, but what I meant was to be undeniable. I learned the rules fast. Show up early, stay late. Answer emails like they were alarms. Never be the person who needs something. My boss loved that. So did my fear. There was a winter evening I still see clearly. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your typing sound rude. I looked up and realized the only other light on in the building was the janitor's cart. A man pushing a mop didn't need my approval to go home. I did. My phone buzzed. A text from my wife. Are you coming to dinner? I typed back. Soon? I meant it when I said it. Then I didn't move. That's how the mistake grows. You don't choose work over life in one dramatic moment. You do it in tiny surrenders that feel responsible. At first, those surrenders are rewarded. People notice. Well, you get invited into rooms. You get trusted with bigger problems. And if you're someone who grew up measuring your worth by usefulness, that trust feels like love. But careers don't love you. They utilize you. The warning nobody gives is that competence has a shadow. Once you become the person who can always carry more, people stop asking whether you should. They assume you will, and you, trying to be good, keep proving them right. I didn't realize how much I'd given away until a Saturday morning when I had no meetings. I sat at the kitchen table, calendar open, and felt strange, like a dog that had been running so long it forgot why. I didn't know what to do with quiet. I didn't know what I liked anymore. I only knew what I was needed for. There's another trap hidden inside that kind of hustle. You begin to confuse motion with progress. You stop asking, is this moving me toward the life I want? And start asking, is this impressive? I can tell you the exact sound of my inbox at midnight. A soft chime that made my stomach drop. I trained myself like a dog, rewarded for responding, anxious when I wasn't. And the people around me learned something too. They learned they could reach into my evenings whenever they wanted. They learned my boundaries were negotiable. I didn't set that expectation with words. I set it with behavior. The weird part is that I wasn't even chasing luxury. I was chasing relief. I thought if I could just get stable enough, respectable enough, I could relax. But I kept building a ladder that leaned against the wrong wall, and each rung made it harder to climb down. The hardest part is that the world praises the mistake. Nobody pulls you aside and says, hey, you're becoming a stranger to yourself. They say, you're on a great track. I remember a lunch with an older colleague named Frank. He had hands like a mechanic and a laugh that made people turn their heads. He'd been at the company forever, the kind of man who knew which elevators were slow and which meetings were harmless. We were sitting near the window, city traffic below us like a nervous current. He watched me eat like I was late for something, because I was. He said, you ever notice how calendars don't just hold time? They take it? I smiled like he was joking. He wasn't. He asked me what I wanted my days to feel like. Not my title, not my retirement number. My days. I didn't have an answer. That should have scared me. Instead, I changed the subject to a project deadline. That's what people do when a question is too honest. Frank told me about his first marriage, how he'd missed birthdays because the client needed him, how he'd been promoted 3 times and still felt like he was failing at home. He said, I kept thinking the next level would calm things down. It never did. Then he said something I didn't want to hear. If you don't decide what your career is for, it will decide what you're for. That's the career mistake in plain language. You let the job become the center, then you decorate the edges with whatever time is left. A little love here, a little health there, a weekend trip when the quarter ends. You start living on leftovers. The city outside kept moving. Frank's voice lowered. He said, your work will take every ounce you offer. It's not cruel. It's just hungry. I went back upstairs and opened my calendar. I moved meetings around like furniture. I did not move my life. For years, that felt normal. It wasn't. It was surrender with a nice suit on, Frank didn't talk like a motivational speaker. He talked like a man who had paid tuition. He told me, "You can lose 10 years without losing your job. That's what makes it dangerous." When I got back to my desk, I noticed the small things I hadn't noticed before. How often I ate while standing, how often I said just one more thing to my own family, how often I promised myself rest, the way people promise themselves they'll start saving next month.
And I realized something humiliating. I had become very skilled at a life I didn't even enjoy.
There's a moment, usually in your 40s or 50s, when you start to notice the cost in your body. It's not dramatic. It's small things that add up until they're no longer small.
For me, it was a tightness in my chest that showed up on a normal Wednesday. Not a heart attack, not an emergency, just a warning that my system had been running hot for too long.
I was driving to work, sunrise just beginning, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken a deep breath on purpose. My shoulders were permanently raised like I was bracing for impact. That's what a career built on approval does. Your body becomes a guard dog. At the office, my calendar looked like a wall. Blocks stacked on blocks. Every hour owned. I kept telling myself I was providing, but the truth was, I was performing. Providing has an end. Performing doesn't. That afternoon, I left early for a doctor's appointment. In the waiting room, I watched a man about my age scroll his phone like the screen could save him. Across from him, an older woman held a paperback and turned pages slowly, as if time belonged to her. I envied her. That sounds ridiculous, but it was real. The doctor asked me about sleep. I laughed. He asked about exercise. I gave him a polite lie. He asked about stress. I told him my job was demanding, like that made it respectable. He looked at me and said very calmly, "Your life is arranged around urgency. That's not the same as importance." I went back to the office and noticed how often people said the word fire, fire drill, putting out fires. Everything was treated like a crisis, and the more I fed that culture, the more it expected me to keep feeding it. Here's what nobody warns you about. When you build your career around constant responsiveness, you lose the ability to be present. Even when you're home, your mind is still at work. Your family gets your body, your job gets your attention. That's the real cost, not hours. Presence. On the drive home from that appointment, I hit traffic. Traffic crawled. That night, I tried to unwind by scrolling through work messages. My son asked me a question from the doorway. I answered without looking up. He walked away. A small moment, almost nothing. Later, I couldn't remember what he'd asked, and that bothered me more than the chest tightness. We talk about careers like they're separate from life. They're not. They shape your nervous system. They shape your attention span. They shape the kind of parent, partner, and friend you become when nobody is watching. If your career rewards urgency, you'll start worshiping urgency. And worship is a hard habit to break. The mistake also changes how you speak, or more accurately, how you don't. When your career depends on being liked, you become careful. You learn to swallow opinions. You learn to laugh at jokes you don't respect. You learn to nod in meetings you should challenge. You become easy to work with, which is sometimes code for quietly compliant. I can trace it to a specific day, a conference room, glass walls, city behind us like a stage set. My team had spent weeks on a plan. A senior leader walked in late, skimmed 2 slides, and dismissed it with a wave. Not because it was wrong, because he didn't like that it wasn't his. I felt my jaw tighten. I also felt the familiar calculation. If I push back, am I difficult? If I stay quiet, am I safe? I stayed quiet. I told myself it was strategic. I told myself I could fix it later. What I really did was teach everyone in that room what they could do to me. That's a career mistake no one talks about. You train people how to treat you. The next week, that same leader assigned my best person to another project without asking. I smiled through it. I called it collaboration. My employee looked at me like I'd sold him. Maybe I had. Later that night, I sat at home with my laptop open, pretending I was just catching up. My wife was reading on the couch. I could hear pages turning. I wanted to tell her what happened. I didn't. I didn't want to sound weak. I didn't want to admit I'd been small. That's what the mistake does. It shrinks you privately while it grows you publicly. You become a well-paid version of someone who avoids conflict. And here's the ugly truth. You can climb very high like that. You can also wake up one day and realize you're surrounded by a life built on your silence. The career mistake isn't only choosing the wrong job, it's choosing the wrong self. The day after that meeting, I opened my notes and saw I'd written a sentence to myself. Don't rock the boat. I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. That's why this mistake hides so well. It feels like maturity. It feels like professionalism. But if you keep shrinking in the name of peace, you end up with a career that looks impressive and a spine that feels tired. I started noticing how often I used soft language to hide hard truths. Maybe we could consider just a thought. Not a big deal. Every one of those phrases was a small retreat. And over time, your world fills with people who are comfortable with your retreats. Then when you finally speak plainly, they act surprised. They shouldn't be. You taught them what to expect. The turning point didn't arrive as inspiration. It arrived as embarrassment. My daughter was in her early 20s. We were at a small diner. Sticky table, bad coffee, good fries. She asked me, "What do you actually want to do now?" Not where do you work? Not how's the company? What do you want? I opened my mouth and almost answered with my job title. That's when I realized how deep the wiring was. I told her honestly, I'm not sure. It came out quieter than I expected, like admitting I couldn't swim. She didn't judge me. She just said, "That's wild. You've been sure my whole life." On the drive home, I kept thinking about that. How many years I'd sounded confident because I was busy, not because I was clear. That week, I did something simple. I opened my calendar and treated it like it was a confession. I highlighted the blocks that were truly necessary. Then I circled the ones that existed because I didn't know how to say no. There were more circles than highlights. I also wrote down 3 names, people I'd been meaning to call. Not networking calls, real calls, the kind where you listen. The first call was awkward. I hadn't practiced being a human without an agenda. But 10 minutes in, I felt something loosen, like a belt you didn't realize was too tight. That's when I understood. The opposite of the career mistake isn't quitting. It's choosing. Choosing what your work is for. Choosing what you protect. Choosing who gets your best hours. Some people will be disappointed when you stop being endlessly available. Let them be. Their disappointment is not your emergency. The career mistake is letting your career be the author. The correction is becoming the editor, not overnight, not with bravado, with small decisions that add up to a life you recognize. That's the part nobody warns you about either. Freedom feels unfamiliar at first. I also did something that felt almost irresponsible. I left my phone in another room for an hour. Just an hour. At first, I kept walking back to check it like it was a stove I'd left on. Then the urge faded, and I realized how addicted I'd been to being summoned. That's the moment the correction became real. Not in my head, in my behavior. I didn't quit my job. I didn't announce a new life. I simply stopped treating every request like a command. I started answering some messages in the morning instead of at night. I started saying, I can do that next week, without apologizing for it. And here's the strange part. The world didn't end. Most of the emergencies dissolved on their own. I had been living in a constant state of readiness for problems that often weren't real. Once I started editing, I noticed something else. I had been living in public, not online, just emotionally public, always scanning for reactions, always adjusting, always trying to be the version of myself that caused the least friction. That habit doesn't stay at work. It follows you into your home like a shadow. So I practiced something that felt almost childish. I made a morning window, 30 minutes, no phone, no email, just coffee, a book, and the quiet city waking up. I didn't earn it. I protected it. The first week, my mind fought me. It kept trying to drag me back to urgency. But slowly, the mornings got wider. Not on the clock. Inside me. I started walking again, not power walking with headphones and a purpose. Just walking. I watched storefronts open. I watched people in work clothes carry their own stories. I realized how long I'd been rushing past my life like it was an inconvenience. One Saturday, I went through an old photo album, not to be sentimental, to remember. There I was at 35, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed time was obedient. There were pictures of vacations I barely remembered because I'd been checking my phone. That hit harder than I expected. Regret isn't always about what you did. Sometimes it's about what you weren't present for. The career mistake grows when you keep promising yourself you'll start living after this quarter, after this project, after this promotion, those finish lines move. Life doesn't. If you're hearing any of yourself in this, I'm not telling you to blow up your career. I'm telling you to stop offering it, the best parts of you, by default. Keep your competence, keep your ambition. Just don't make them your entire personality. Because one day, when the meetings stop, you'll still need a life to return to. One evening, I cooked dinner without multitasking. No podcast, no emails, just chopping vegetables and listening to the quiet noises of a house that isn't rushing. It felt boring, then it felt peaceful. That's the order those feelings come in when you've been overstimulated for years. Later, I sat by the window and watched the city lights come on one by one. I realized how long I'd been treating rest like it had to be justified, as if being alive wasn't reason enough. When people say they want work-life balance, they make it sound like a spreadsheet. It's not a spreadsheet. It's a relationship. If your career is the loudest voice in your life, it will become the only voice you hear. So the practice isn't balance. its priority over and over in small ways until it becomes your normal again. I'll tell you what I wish someone had said to me when I was younger, before the title, before the money, before the "you're doing great" speeches. Your career is a tool. It is not a verdict. If you make it your verdict, you will keep chasing proof that you matter. You'll chase it with hours. You'll chase it with silence. You'll chase it by being useful until you're exhausted. And the cruel part is that it will work. People will reward you. They'll call you reliable. They'll call you steady. They'll call you a leader. Meanwhile, you'll be quietly trading away the parts of life that don't applaud. So here's a better question than what's the safest move? Ask, what kind of days am I building? If your days are nothing but urgency, the future won't feel like freedom. It will feel like emptiness because you never practice being present. This is where action matters, not grand gestures, small, stubborn choices. Put the call on the calendar and treat it like a meeting. Take the walk without turning it into a task. Close the laptop when your body says it's done. Say the sentence you've been avoiding in the conference room calmly once, not to win, to stop disappearing. And if you're at a turning point, health scare, divorce, burnout, don't waste it. Those moments are painful, but they're honest. They show you what the old arrangement cost. The career mistake no one warns you about is letting your work become the place where you go to be valued. Don't do that. Let your work support your life. Let your life be the place you're proud to live. Quietly successful isn't a paycheck. It's a life that still feels like yours when the office lights go out. If you're still early enough to change the pattern, take advantage of that. If you're late enough to feel the cost, take advantage of that too. Late clarity isn't a punishment. It's a chance to stop paying for the same lesson twice. You don't need a dramatic exit to correct the mistake. You need a clear line, a boundary, a standard you keep even when nobody praises you for it. Because the quietest success is this: you can look at your calendar, your health, your relationships, and your own mind and recognize yourself. That's what I want for you. Not applause, not a perfect resume, a life that feels like yours. And if you're thinking, I can't afford to slow down, I understand. I said that too. But you can't afford to wake up 10 years from now and realize you were present everywhere except in your own life.